The coffee cup slipped from Lieutenant Commander Reyna Switchback Voss's fingers, ceramic shattering against the linoleum floor of the officers' mess at Ramstein Air Base. Around her, conversations continued their mundane drone. Complaints about the weather, weekend plans, the quality of the schnitzel. But Reyna had gone stone still, her entire world narrowing to the two words she'd just overheard from the corner booth behind her. Phoenix Gate. General Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through her consciousness like a blade. She'd heard those words only twice before, once in a classified briefing that had ended her Air Force career, and once in a nightmare that still woke her screaming. Phoenix Gate wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The program had been terminated, buried so deep that even its ashes were classified above her clearance level. Her hands trembled as she knelt to gather the broken porcelain, muscle memory from her F-22 Raptor days, keeping her movements precise despite the chaos erupting in her mind. 3 years of serving coffee and wiping tables, 3 years of being invisible in her pale blue civilian uniform, while real pilots walked past her like she was furniture. 3 years of pretending that Lieutenant Commander Voss had died in that cockpit over the South China Sea, leaving behind only Reyna the waitress with her fake smile and her carefully maintained anonymity. Phoenix Gate is active again, Morrison continued, his words barely audible above the clatter of dishes. We need someone who knows the original protocols, someone expendable. The ceramic fragment cut into her palm, drawing blood. Expendable. That word had followed her through 2 medical boards, a congressional inquiry, and a discharge hearing that had stripped away everything she'd ever worked for. But expendable didn't mean worthless. She'd learned that the hard way. Rising slowly, she caught her reflection in the chrome coffee dispenser. 34 years old, auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun despite no longer being bound by military grooming standards. Green eyes that had once tracked enemy aircraft through cloud cover at Mach 2.1. The woman staring back at her wasn't the broken pilot who'd limped back to base with half her squadron missing and a story no one wanted to hear. The general's conversation shifted to logistics, coordinates, timeline, asset deployment. Words that meant nothing to the other diners, but painted a tactical picture in Reyna's mind with frightening clarity. Someone was going to die. Multiple someones, if her understanding of Phoenix Gate protocols remained accurate. She turned toward the corner booth, her server's smile sliding into place like armor. Time to remind them why they used to call her Switchback. The general looked up as she approached, his weathered face creasing with mild annoyance at the interruption. Beside him sat a man she didn't recognize. Expensive suit, manicured nails, the kind of softness that came from never having to duck incoming fire. The billionaire, she realized. The one funding whatever resurrection of Phoenix Gate was about to get good people killed. More coffee, sir. Her voice carried the proper deference of the service industry, but her eyes locked onto Morrison's with laser intensity. Recognition dawned slowly across the general's features, followed immediately by something that might have been fear. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Switchback. The billionaire looked confused, glancing between them. You know this Waitress. Morrison's laugh held no humor. Waitress. He shook his head, never breaking eye contact with Reyna. This is Lieutenant Commander Reyna Voss, the only pilot to survive the original Phoenix Gate mission. The coffee pot in her hands suddenly felt like a weapon. Around them, the mess hall continued its oblivious buzz, unaware that 3 years of carefully constructed invisibility had just evaporated with 2 words and a broken cup. I was told all Phoenix Gate personnel were dead, the billionaire said slowly, his voice taking on a calculating edge. The files said what they needed to say, Reyna interrupted, setting the coffee pot down with deliberate precision. But I'm very much alive, and if Phoenix Gate is operational again, you're going to need someone who understands why it failed the first time. The silence that followed stretched taut as piano wire. Morrison's hand rested near his service weapon, old habits, even in a mess hall full of allies. The billionaire's eyes had gone cold, calculating. This was the moment that would determine whether she walked out of here as Reyna the Waitress or as something far more dangerous. The original mission parameters remain classified, Morrison said finally. Even from you. Classified. She tasted the word like poison. Like the 47 men and women who died because someone decided political convenience trumped tactical reality. Her voice remained conversational, but every word carried the weight of 3 years' worth of suppressed rage. Phoenix Gate isn't just a mission, General. It's a graveyard with wings. The billionaire leaned forward, suddenly interested. What exactly happened out there? Morrison shot him a warning look, but Reyna was already speaking. What happened is that someone with more money than sense convinced the Joint Chiefs that stealth technology could compensate for inadequate intelligence and impossible objectives. What happened is that we flew into a trap because admitting ignorance doesn't look good in PowerPoint presentations. Her fingers traced the edge of the table, muscle memory from 1,000 pre-flight briefings. 12 F-22 Raptors, 6 F-35 Lightning IIs, and 2 experimental aircraft that officially never existed. We were supposed to penetrate Chinese airspace, eliminate a high-value target, and extract without leaving evidence of American involvement. Clean, simple, deniable. And the billionaire's voice had gone soft, hungry for details. And the target was defended by systems that weren't supposed to exist. Surface-to-air missiles with tracking capabilities that made our stealth worthless. Fighter aircraft using technology we'd never encountered. It was like they knew we were coming before we left the runway. Morrison's face had gone ashen. The mission briefings indicated minimal resistance. The mission briefings were fantasy. Her laugh held 3 years of bitter experience. By the time we realized how wrong our intelligence was, half the squadron was already burning holes in the South China Sea. I made it back because I disobeyed direct orders and broke radio silence to coordinate a retreat that wasn't supposed to exist in our tactical doctrine. The billionaire pulled out a tablet, fingers dancing across its surface. According to my sources, the technology that defeated you has been neutralized. Different battlefield, different parameters. Your sources. She studied his face, nodding the careful neutrality that came from practiced deception. The same sources that told you all Phoenix Gate personnel were dead. The situation has changed, Morrison interjected. New intelligence, new assets, new objectives. We're not asking you to repeat the original mission. Then what are you asking? The general glanced around the mess hall, then leaned closer. There's a facility in the Carpathian Mountains, Romanian airspace, but the target itself exists in a legal gray area. Our satellite imagery suggests advanced weapons development, technology that could shift global power balance if it falls into the wrong hands. Reyna closed her eyes, seeing the tactical picture unfold. And you can't use conventional forces because Romania is NATO, which means any overt action triggers Article 5 considerations. Precisely. We need surgical precision, total deniability, and 0 American fingerprints. A single aircraft, single pilot, in and out before anyone knows we were there. Suicide mission, you mean? The words came out flat, matter of fact. Same as before, just a different country. The billionaire cleared his throat. The pilot would be compensated appropriately. 7 figures, paid to a beneficiary of your choosing upon successful mission completion. Blood money. But even as she said it, Reyna felt the familiar tingle of adrenaline, the hunger for sky and speed and purpose that 3 years of coffee service hadn't managed to kill. What makes you think I'd be interested? Morrison reached into his jacket, producing a manila folder stamped with classification markings that made her stomach clench. Because 47 of your people are still out there. Her world tilted. That's impossible. I saw them die. You saw them go down. But electronic warfare capabilities have advanced significantly since your mission. What looked like catastrophic destruction might have been elaborate theater. He slid the folder across the table. Intelligence suggests at least some of your squadron survived, were captured, and are currently being held as leverage against future American operations in the region. Her fingers hovered over the folder, not quite touching. You're lying. Open it. The photographs inside were grainy, taken at extreme distance through what looked like telephoto surveillance equipment. but the faces were unmistakable. Captain Marcus, deadstick. Rodriguez, adjusting what looked like prison garb. Lieutenant Sarah, ghost. Kim in conversation with an unidentified guard. Major David, thunderhead. Chen standing in what appeared to be a concrete courtyard. Her squadron, her people, alive. These were taken 6 weeks ago at a detention facility approximately 200 kilometers from the target location, Morrison continued. Our intelligence suggests they're being used as test subjects for the same advanced weapons systems we need to eliminate. The folder slipped from her fingers, photographs scattering across the table. 3 years of grief, 3 years of survivor's guilt, 3 years of believing herself responsible for their deaths, all of it crumbling in the face of grainy surveillance photos. "You son of a bitch," she whispered. You've known this whole time." "Need-to-know basis," Morrison replied without emotion. "And until now, you didn't need to know." The billionaire was watching this exchange with obvious fascination, like a child observing laboratory animals. "So you see, Miss Voss, this isn't really about money or patriotism or even redemption. This is about bringing your people home." Her hands were shaking now, fine tremors that would have grounded her from flight status if anyone had been paying attention. But nobody was paying attention. They never had been. 3 years of invisibility, 3 years of being dismissed as the waitress who used to be somebody important. "What aircraft?" The words came out professionally calm, despite the emotional storm raging beneath. Morrison almost smiled. "Experimental. Designation classified, but it incorporates lessons learned from Phoenix Gate failures. Advanced stealth, electronic countermeasures, and weapons systems specifically designed to counter the technology that defeated you before. Pilot training. 2 weeks. Enough to familiarize you with the systems, but not enough for anyone to notice unusual activity patterns." She gathered the photographs, studying each face. Rodriguez with his cocky grin that had gotten him through flight school despite mediocre grades. Kim with her meticulous attention to detail that made her the squadron's best navigator. Chen with his steady hands and steadier nerves that had earned him the squadron leader position she'd coveted. All of them alive. All of them depending on her making the same choice that had gotten them killed the first time. "When?" she asked. 72 hours. There's a weather window that won't repeat for another month, and intelligence suggests the facility will be relocated soon. Morrison's voice carried the weight of operational necessity. "After that, we lose them forever." The billionaire slid a business card across the table. "My private number. Call within 6 hours if you're interested. After that, we explore alternative options." She pocketed the card without looking at it. Alternative options. "There are other pilots, less experienced but available." His smile held no warmth. "Though admittedly, none with your particular qualifications." Morrison stood, adjusting his uniform with practiced precision. "For what it's worth, Switchback, I'm sorry about how things went down before. The inquiry, the discharge, none of that was personal." Everything about Phoenix Gate was personal. She remained seated, surrounded by the debris of her carefully constructed anonymity. "Those were my people up there, my responsibility. And now they can be your mission." After they left, she sat alone at the table, staring at the photographs until the faces began to blur. Around her, the mess hall continued its mundane rhythm. Conversations about nothing, complaints about everything, the steady hum of lives lived without consequence. She thought about her apartment off base, sparse and clean and empty of anything that might connect her to the woman she used to be. She thought about her bank account, depleted by 3 years of minimum wage and medical bills for injuries that officially never happened. She thought about the nightmares that still woke her at 300, the phantom sound of radar lock warnings and dying radios. Most of all, she thought about 47 people who might still be alive, still waiting for rescue, still believing that someone would come for them. Her reflection in the coffee pot showed a woman transformed. The careful invisibility was gone, replaced by something harder, sharper, more dangerous. Lieutenant Commander Raina, Switchback, Voss was no longer dead, and Phoenix Gate was about to learn what that meant. Standing slowly, she untied her apron and folded it with military precision. The manager would assume she'd walked off the job. It happened often enough among the transient workforce that served the base. No one would ask questions, no one would file reports, no one would wonder where the quiet waitress with the steady hands had disappeared to. She pulled out the Billionaire's card, studying the embossed lettering. Marcus Vanderhome, CEO of Vanderhome Defense Solutions. She'd heard the name whispered in Pentagon corridors, a ghost in the defense contracting world who specialized in operations that officially didn't exist. The kind of man who could make 47 American service members disappear from official records while keeping them alive just long enough to serve as bait. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she dialed the number. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "I was wondering when you'd call," Vanderhome said without preamble. "And—" "I'm in," she replied, her voice carrying across 3 years and 47 ghosts. "But we do this my way, or we don't do it at all." His laugh held genuine amusement. "I wouldn't have it any other way, switchback. Welcome back to the war." The line went dead, leaving her alone with the weight of a decision that would either bring her people home or add her name to the list of the officially deceased. Either way, the waiting was over. Time to remember what it felt like to fly. The hangar at Nellie's Air Force Base looked like any other at 400 hours, shadows and silence broken only by the distant hum of climate control systems. But appearances, Raina had learned, were often carefully constructed lies. She stood in the passenger seat of an unmarked sedan, watching technicians in civilian clothes perform what looked like routine maintenance on aircraft that definitely weren't routine. "Impressive, isn't it?" Vanderhome emerged from the darkness like a well-dressed specter, his breath visible in the cool desert air. $2 billion in development costs, 3 years of testing, and nobody outside this hangar knows it exists. The aircraft before them defied easy categorization. Sleeker than an F-22, larger than an F-35, with wing configurations that seemed to shift depending on viewing angle. Radar-absorbent coating gave it an almost liquid appearance under the hangar's fluorescent lights, like a predator designed by committee and built by nightmares. "Designation?" she asked, slipping automatically into the crisp professionalism that had once defined her. "YF-41 Phantom." Vanderhome's voice carried the pride of ownership. "Variable geometry wings, adaptive camouflage systems, and electronic warfare capabilities that make conventional stealth technology look like smoke signals." She circled the aircraft slowly, her trained eye cataloging details that would have been meaningless to civilian observers. Air intakes designed for minimal thermal signature, weapons bays configured for precision munitions, sensor arrays that probably cost more than her childhood home. Engines. Hybrid propulsion. Conventional turbofans for efficiency, scramjet capability for when you need to be somewhere yesterday. Maximum speed classified, but let's say it makes the SR-71 look pedestrian. A technician approached with a tablet, gesturing toward various systems. Raina recognized the ritual, the pre-flight briefing that separated tourists from pilots. She accepted the device, scrolling through technical specifications that read like science fiction. 2 weeks to learn this, she asked skeptically. "You won't be learning it," Vanderhome replied. "You'll be becoming it. Neural interface technology, experimental but proven. The aircraft responds to thought as much as physical input." Her training kicked in, the paranoid skepticism that had kept her alive when superior technology had gotten her squadron killed. "What's the catch?" "Catch? Nobody builds a $2 billion aircraft for a single mission without expecting something in return. What happens after I bring my people home?" Vanderhome's smile could have cut glass. "After? There is no after, switchback. This mission succeeds or it never happened. You understand the implications." She understood perfectly. Success meant her squadron came home. Failure meant 48 names added to the list of those who'd never existed. Either way, the YF-41 Phantom would disappear back into whatever black budget had birthed it. "I want to talk to my people first." "Impossible." Communication channels are monitored, and any attempt to establish contact would compromise the operation. Then how do I know they're really alive? He produced another tablet, this one showing video footage of the detention facility. Poor quality, but unmistakably recent. She could see snow on the ground, and intelligence reports indicated the region had experienced an early winter storm system just days ago. Her squadron moved with the careful precision of people adapting to captivity, but they moved. Alive. Waiting. 48 hours from now, you'll either be reunited with them or none of this conversation will matter. Vanderhome's voice had gone cold, businesslike. I suggest we focus on ensuring the former outcome. The neural interface required a surgical procedure that officially never happened in a medical facility that didn't exist. Local anesthetic and precision instruments, threading fiber optic cables through tissue with microscopic accuracy. The surgeon never spoke, never made eye contact, performed the operation with the detached efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Raina studied her reflection afterward, searching for visible changes. Nothing obvious, just a small scar behind her left ear, easily hidden by hair. But she could feel the difference, a strange awareness of electronic systems around her, like a new sense awakening. Testing begins in 1 hour, the surgeon said finally, the first words he'd spoken since her arrival. Dr. Kalinski will explain the interface protocols. Dr. Kalinski turned out to be a neurological engineer with enthusiastic eyes and the social skills of a particularly awkward laboratory mouse. Fascinating technology, she bubbled, attaching sensors to Raina's temples. Direct neural pathway to flight systems, real-time biometric feedback, predictive response algorithms. You'll be flying the aircraft before you know you want to. The simulation chamber looked like something from a fever dream, three-dimensional projections creating a virtual cockpit around her prone form. As the systems activated, reality shifted. She was no longer lying on a padded table in an underground facility. She was strapped into the pilot's seat of an aircraft unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Think about turning left. Dr. Kalinski's voice echoed from speakers built into the simulation space. Raina thought about banking left, and the virtual landscape tilted accordingly. No stick input, no rudder pressure, just intention translated into action with terrifying precision. Excellent, now try accelerating. The desire for speed produced immediate results. G-forces pressed against her body as the simulation responded to thoughts she'd barely formed. This wasn't flying, this was becoming flight itself. Hours passed in a blur of virtual missions, each scenario more complex than the last. Night insertions through hostile airspace, precision strikes against hardened targets, aerial combat against enemies that existed only in digital space. The neural interface adapted to her thought patterns, learning her instincts and preferences until the boundary between pilot and aircraft began to dissolve. Impressive reaction times, Dr. Kalinski observed during a brief break. Most test pilots require weeks to achieve this level of integration. You're managing it in hours. Most test pilots haven't spent their careers depending on their aircraft for survival, Raina replied, accepting a water bottle with hands that trembled slightly from neural feedback. When the machine keeps you alive, you learn to trust it. And when it fails? The question hit like a physical blow. Her squadron's faces flashed through her memory. Rodriguez's last radio transmission, Kim's aircraft disappearing into clouds, Chen's desperate attempt to coordinate a retreat that came too late. When it fails, she said slowly, people die. Dr. Kalinski's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy. The YF-41 won't fail. The technology is. Revolutionary, unprecedented, game-changing. Raina had heard the same promises before Phoenix Gate, the same assurances that superior technology would overcome tactical disadvantages. Dr. Kalinski, have you ever been shot at? Well, no, but... Then respectfully, your opinion about failure rates is theoretical. In combat, everything fails. Equipment, communications, intelligence, tactics, everything. The only variable is when. She stood, joints protesting after hours in the simulation chamber. How long until the real aircraft? 6 hours. Final systems checks, weather briefing, and mission parameters. After that, Dr. Kalinske gestured toward the simulation chamber. This becomes reality. The hangar at 2200 hours held a different energy, the tense anticipation that preceded operations where mistake margins approached zero. The YF-41 sat under harsh spotlights, surrounded by technicians making final adjustments to systems that existed at the bleeding edge of possibility. Morrison appeared at her elbow like a bureaucratic specter. Final briefing in conference room, see mission specifics, emergency protocols, extraction procedures. Extraction procedures? She followed him toward a trailer that had been converted into a command center. I thought this was in and out, no support. It is, but we're not completely insane. Morrison's smile held no humor. There are contingencies for various failure modes. Conference room C turned out to be a cramped space dominated by wall-mounted displays showing satellite imagery, weather patterns, and tactical overlays. Vanderhoem sat at the head of a table that had seen better decades, surrounded by people who looked like they'd stepped out of a Tom Clancy novel. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison announced, allow me to introduce Lieutenant Commander Raina Voss, call sign Switchback. She'll be conducting tonight's operation. The assembled personnel studied her with expressions ranging from professional interest to barely concealed skepticism. She was accustomed to the reaction. Female pilots still drew attention in certain circles, especially when the mission stakes approached the impossible. Mission parameters, Vanderhoem began, activating a display that showed topographical maps of the Carpathian Mountains. Target facility designated Blackwater Station, coordinates classified but approximately 200 kilometers southeast of Cluj-Napoca. Intelligence suggests advanced weapons research, possibly including the technology that defeated the original Phoenix Gate operation. The tactical situation unfolded on the displays like a particularly complex chess problem. Mountain terrain that would mask approach but complicate escape, air defense networks that required careful navigation, weather patterns that provided concealment at the cost of visibility. Primary objective, Morrison continued, is destruction of research facilities and extraction of any American personnel being held unlawfully. Secondary objectives include intelligence gathering on weapons systems and elimination of key personnel involved in the detention of American service members. Raina studied the imagery, her trained eye picking out details that painted a tactical picture of daunting complexity. Air defenses. Sophisticated but not insurmountable. Surface-to-air missile sites here, here, and here. A technician highlighted threat locations with laser pointers. Fighter patrol routes suggest limited nocturnal capability, but we're assuming worst-case scenarios for mission planning. Weather. Overcast conditions, limited visibility, wind speeds within acceptable parameters for the YF-41's flight envelope. The meteorologist sounded bored, like she was discussing weekend picnic prospects rather than conditions that would determine mission success. Intelligence on personnel. Vanderhoem leaned forward, his expression becoming focused. Facility houses approximately 200 military and civilian personnel. Unknown number of American detainees, but we're assuming your entire squadron based on the surveillance footage. She nodded, filing the information alongside tactical considerations that were already forming in her mind. 200 potential hostiles, unknown facility layout, time constraints that would prevent detailed reconnaissance. The kind of mission parameters that turned competent pilots into obituaries. Questions, Morrison asked. Rules of engagement. Whatever it takes to complete the mission and extract our people. Collateral damage is regrettable but acceptable. Vanderhoem's voice carried the casual indifference of someone who'd never had to explain civilian casualties to Gold Star families. Communication protocols. Radio silence except for emergency situations. The YF-41's stealth capabilities are comprehensive but not perfect. Electronic emissions could compromise the operation. Backup plans. Morrison and Vanderhome exchanged glances that spoke volumes about contingencies she wasn't cleared to know. "Complete the mission," Morrison said finally. "Everything else is secondary." The briefing continued for another hour, covering details that transformed an already complex operation into something approaching the impossible. Fuel calculations that left no margin for error, timing windows measured in minutes, success criteria that required everything to go exactly right. But between the technical specifications and tactical requirements, one thing became increasingly clear. This wasn't just a rescue mission. The YF-41 Phantom, the neural interface technology, the carefully orchestrated revelation of her squadron's survival, all of it pointed toward something larger, more complex than bringing 47 people home. "One final item," Vanderhome said as the briefing concluded. "Upon completion of this mission, regardless of outcome, all participants will be reassigned to positions that preclude discussion of these events. Standard non-disclosure agreements backed by national security considerations." Translation: succeed or fail, everyone involved would disappear into bureaucratic anonymity or worse. The same fate that had befallen her after the original Phoenix Gate disaster. "Understood," she replied, though understanding and acceptance occupied different territories entirely. The next 4 hours passed in mechanical preparation, flight suit fitting, equipment checks, final medical clearances. The neural interface hummed with low-level activity, creating a constant awareness of the aircraft waiting in the hangar. She could feel its systems like an extension of her nervous system, alien but increasingly familiar. At 300, she stood before the YF-41 in full flight gear, surrounded by technicians performing final systems checks. The aircraft seemed larger now, more imposing, like a living thing waiting to be awakened. "Pre-flight checklist complete," announced the crew chief, a grizzled sergeant whose expression suggested he'd seen enough experimental aircraft to be skeptical of promises. "All systems nominal, fuel load verified, mission package installed." She climbed into the cockpit with movements made automatic by thousands of hours of flight time. But this felt different. The neural interface created an awareness of aircraft systems that bordered on the supernatural. She could sense fuel flow, hydraulic pressure, engine temperature without looking at instruments. "Phantom 1, this is control," crackled her headset. "Clearance for departure. Weather conditions acceptable, threat assessment unchanged. You are cleared for takeoff." "Control, Phantom 1. Beginning departure sequence." The engines spooled up with a sound like controlled fury, producing thrust that pressed her into the pilot's seat with familiar authority. But the acceleration felt different, smoother, more responsive, like the aircraft was anticipating her needs rather than simply responding to inputs. Takeoff occurred in a blur of speed and altitude, the YF-41 climbing into darkness with capabilities that redefined her understanding of flight performance. Within minutes, she was alone above the Nevada desert, surrounded by stars and silence, and the weight of a mission that would either bring her people home or add her name to the list of the officially deceased. Phantom 1, switching to autonomous navigation. Next communication in 6 hours unless emergency conditions arise. "Roger, Control. Phantom 1 going dark." She adjusted course toward the Atlantic, the neural interface painting a tactical picture in her mind that no conventional aircraft could match. Enemy radar positions, friendly assets, weather patterns, all of it integrated into an awareness that felt more like omniscience than technology. 47 people were waiting for her in a facility that might not exist, depending on her to make choices that could start wars or end careers. But for the first time in 3 years, Lieutenant Commander Raina, Switchback, Voss was exactly where she belonged. At the controls of an aircraft that could rewrite the rules of warfare, flying toward a mission that would either redefine her legacy or ensure she never had one. Either way, it beat serving coffee.